The Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is heading into its final week, and you just might be familiar with two of the names that top the rankings. Find out who ahead of this week's MLR Championship Final. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 24 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers community members and everyone else tagging along on this fantasy rugby journey of trying to make it a reality in the MLR. I am Ryan Yee, and is with me, as always, Devin Vanderpool. Matt Yee, guys. We have an MLR Championship Final set and ready for us coming up this weekend. The Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is in full swing and is heating up a little bit. It's not too bad a day for rugby, guys, especially fantasy rugby.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, this Fantasy Rucker Playoff Challenge heating up, because me and the boys are just sitting at the top and nobody can catch us.
Instantly, right?
Okay, so this is episode 3 that we've done the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, and I think every single episode that we've had it so far, you have come off right off the top and made it sure that everyone knew that you're doing well in this this fantasy challenge. And I don't know if people could have handled that if you were at the top in our league.
If we have a fantasy year that Matt is first and just keeps riding that wave like he does in football, I'm not doing the podcast anymore. I'm sick.
No, you are. You
would never hear the end of it.
Here's the thing. At the end of last episode, you blew up my ego and you blew it up so much that it has yet to deflate. So it's still sitting up there.
It mutated. I blew it up so much it mutated.
There
That's even worse.
What am I supposed to do? You're throwing, you're giving me an alley-oop, and I'm just finishing it for you.
Well, that's right. We have had the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge in full swing. And yeah, if you didn't hear it last episode, we pumped Matt's tires a little bit. He's been doing pretty well. He's been doing pretty well in this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge so far. 2 rounds into this thing. We're heading into a final this week. We'll see whether or not he can keep up with that, but it's looking good so far. And we're going to break that all down this episode. And we have a lot of people that also enter their own submissions into the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. So we're going to go over where they stand as well. I'm sure a lot of you are tuning in to find out where you are amongst the league members and amongst the Matt Yee, I guess, so far, who's been the one to beat in the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge so far. But yeah, with that being said, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, you'll want to follow us at the Fantasy Ruckers on social media. Give us a subscribe on YouTube as well. Hey, we're just 3 guys trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. If you follow us on social media, if you subscribe on YouTube, you'll be first to know on how that's coming along. And hey, if there's a spot that opens up where it's possible that you can play fantasy rugby, that's where you'll find out as well. So make sure to go to all those places and like and follow and subscribe there as well. We really do appreciate it. And we love interacting with you guys too. That's been part of this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. A lot of interaction with the community who also hope for fantasy rugby to be a thing relatively soon here in Major League Rugby. But with that being said, guys, yes, we're going to get to the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. We're going to break down the really exciting conference final round that we had last week. That was a lot of fun. But first, we have to get to the segment that we introduced. What are you guys laughing about? What are you laughing about?
I took my hat off and his face lit up. Hey, I took my hat off and his face lit up. I take my hat off and the glow comes off and Matt's face.
If you're watching on you or listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, Vandy took off his hat, and I don't think Matt was prepared for the light to glow off of that shining head of his. But
if you don't know what I look like, I'm bald.
This just reminded me of, I saw this post earlier today. This one guy on this college football team got voted best hair. He's bald.
All right, getting this back on track.
Best hair on the show, big guy.
All right, getting back set on track here. The Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, we are going to get to that, but there was a segment that we introduced for the first time last episode, and that is Ask the Fantasy Ruckers Show. And we said we want to hear from you. We want to hear any questions that you might have about fantasy rugby, about the MLR, about the two of them coming together here and making this fun new project that we've been working on. If you have any questions about it, we want to hear from you using the hashtag AskTFR Show hashtag on social media. And we've been listening, and there has been an interesting question that has come up. But first, before we go to this week's question, we got to talk about last week's question. And last week we talked whether or not you would choose Bodine Waka, AJ Alatima, and we even threw in Joe Peterson in there because Vandy had to get his boy into that question in the very first Ask TFR Show queue that we had to answer. And we posted it to the people, guys. And I think, Matt, you went with Bodine Waka. Vandy, I think you still said you were going with Bodine Waka, despite saying Joe Peterson was a guy that was really consistent in this past season. And the people agree, man. 72.7% agree that it's Bodine Waka as well. 18.2% for Joe Peterson, which was surprising because I thought AJ Alatimu would come second. AJ Alatimu with 9.1% there. It's interesting. I'd be curious to see if that poll still stands with those answers after another huge performance from AJ Alatimu, but we'll get into that in that exciting matchup between the Houston SaberCats and Seattle Seawolves, where he played a big part. But that was last week's question, and now it's time to get into this week's question. And we got this direct message here on social media. With the final coming up, guys, there have been questions and conversations, I should say, that have been stirring about the hardware that these teams get for winning the title. And there have been a lot of different titles and championships that have been won over the past few weeks here in the world of rugby, whether that's overseas in Super Rugby, whether that's in the new United Rugby Championship. Lots of different competitions that have been handing out the hardware. And this week, it's the MLR's turn to hand out a little bit of silverware here. So the question has come up to us how we feel about the hardware that the MLR will be giving out. And Vandy, I'm not too sure. Have you seen what the MLR gives out as their trophy? It is the shield. So let's go over it. So we're going to play a little game here. So Ask TFR Show, it's the MLR shield and we're going to show you guys a bunch of trophies here that have been handed out recently and a couple historical trophies in there. Can't forget about the big ones either. And we're going to get your opinion on what you think about the MLR shield compared to the other trophies that are around the rugby world, new and old. How do you guys feel about that?
Let's get into it.
All right, so let's get into it. The first one, obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, we have the picture pulled up on the screen. But if you're listening on the podcast, we're showing right now the MLR shield. And I don't know what your opinions are on this. It's pretty bland. I guess you're kind of go different. I don't know of a league that has just a straight up shield or a plaque as their trophy. But guys, initial thoughts on the MLR shield as the marquee thing that these players are playing for this weekend.
Well, how am I supposed to drink out of that?
True. That is a big part.
Man. No, you spin it over. It's a charcuterie board.
It's pretty big, dude. It's pretty crazy. Here, we'll look at here. Pulling that up. Here's the Seattle Seawolves that are celebrating with the shield a few years back. So it is pretty big. It's pretty big. But Matt, you got a point though, dude. Drinking out of the cup is a big deal, especially in rugby. You can't do that here with the shield. I don't know. Maybe you bring out a bunch of dollar beers for the boys on it as a tray or something. Maybe that's how you go about this.
No, you start peeling lines off her.
All right. Where did
that'd be if the Giltinis won.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So that is the shield. We'll see what your opinions are compared to the other different trophies among the leagues. So we're going to start off here. We're going to start classic here because I think that's where the easy way to go about this is first. So we're going to start with the Webb Ellis Cup. And this, Vandy, is the trophy that you win if you win the World Cup. So this is the ultimate of the ultimate trophies that rugby players are playing for. The most recent team that won it was, of course, the South Africans, who won it back in 2019. The next World Cup, I believe, is being held in France. Maddie, correct me if I'm wrong, in 2022. This is the Webb Ellis Cup. So the question being, guys, the Webb Ellis Cup or the MLR Shield?
Oh, I'd go the cup.
The Webb Ellis Cup, right?
Done deal.
Well, also, the other thing is that I'm pretty sure that old top lid comes off. So, there's a top lid on that. It comes off so you can drink out of it. So it's all good.
There you go.
Obviously, and plus, it's the Webb Ellis Cup. That's a pretty tough one for the Shield there. That's a tough first matchup.
That is a first matchup.
I wanted to ground a divot into the Shield that you can just pour a little bit of beer into and just.
Well, you know those flights of like a beer that they bring out.
Exactly.
Taking it out. You just need to maybe drill in a few holes around the Shield, and then you can bring out maybe like 23 for all the starters in the team. I feel like that'd be a good tradition. Hey, I think we're onto something here, Bandy.
if it's hot enough, you just cook a good big old steak on that bad boy. I think it probably can get hot.
Maybe. There you go. Thinking outside the box here. All right. I feel like that was an easy one. Webb Ellis Cup, of course, is one of the most prestigious trophies out there. Of course, you're going to pick that over the MLR Shield. All right, the next one. We're going to stick over in more of the prestige of the prestige, and this is the English Premiership Trophy. This is the league over in the UK. This is the cup they play for, the English Premiership Trophy. Pretty classic, similar looking to the English Premiership Trophy in soccer. Yeah.
So British.
It is very British.
Only the British cups have those stupid little flags running off of it.
You don't like it?
What the cup is.
You don't like it?
I mean, come on.
I don't know. I like it.
The cups, compared to the MLR
What are you saying,
like
man? You're like arguing, and then you're like, oh.
I like it. I'm just saying it's so British, but
You're
it's
right.
so better
It's
than
very British, but I do like it.
Well, I mean, the English Premiership, like I said, in soccer is very similar to has the ribbons coming down. Here's a look of the cup. The most recent winners this past weekend, a few days ago, Leicester winning it this past year in the Premiership. They're hoisting the cup up there. So it has a pretty good size to it, man. Matt, I think it passes your quota of, I think you're able to drink out of it. Pretty cool. So the question being MLR Shield or the Gallagher Premiership Rugby Trophy.
I'm gonna go with the cup.
You're going with the cup. Okay. They're again pretty easy there. You got a lot of history behind in the English Premiership. It's a cup, and you can drink out of it. If that's going to be the quota or the criteria that goes on throughout, we might have a tough time here. But that being said, there might be others that might be on that same page of undrinkable trophies, which might be the next one here. So we'll go on to the next one. This one was easy again. A pretty marquee trophy, like you said, Matt. Classic English, has the ribbons, the cup, all that. Here's the next one.
Ooh.
This is the new Super Rugby Trophy with the introduction of a couple new teams and the departure of the South African clubs as well. Super Rugby introducing a brand new trophy for Super Rugby Pacific that was also introduced this past weekend to the Canterbury Crusaders, who won the cup. I believe it was this past week or within the past week or so. They won the Super Rugby Pacific Trophy. This is the brand new, I guess you can't really call it a cup, but I guess, the trophy that they were handing out. The question being MLR Shield or the Super Rugby Pacific Trophy.
So for me, it looks like you have a head.
You can't drink out of either of them.
Inside of a cake.
I could drink out of that. Watch me.
Man, you can drink out of anything, buddy. But it looks like a head inside of a cake. But
you know what it looks like? Like you won the Super Villain Award.
Oh, yes.
Like you were the biggest super villain of the year.
There you go. And here's the super villains of the year, I guess. The Canterbury Crusaders. It's big, right? It was bigger than I expected.
That's a pretty sick trophy, I'll be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. Crusaders are super villains. So
MLR Shield or the Super Rugby Pacific Trophy?
I'm going with the trophy.
Yeah, I'm going with the trophy.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess the MLR Shield is not cutting it for you guys. Okay, this is the last one then. The MLR Shield has one more shot at beating a trophy, and it might have a
Shield is the Dallas Jackals right now.
It might have a shot here. So this is also a brand new trophy, this past Super Rugby Pacific, but there's also a brand new league that we mentioned, the United Rugby Championship. So obviously being like a relatively new league like the MLR, it had to figure out a way of introducing a brand new trophy. What was going to be cool, what was going to look sweet being hoisted there at the end of the season, what would kind of stick and be iconic as part of this brand new league, kind of what, like I said, what the MLR is dealing with. And here the United Rugby Championship decided to go with this high-tech looking thing. I don't know what to think of it, but this is the trophy for the United Rugby Championship. For those of you listening on the podcast, they had this like really high-tech reveal that they did. I don't know how to explain how it looks. There's like 4 metal bars that go up to a cylinder.
I think it's holding the cup. Like it's like 4 arms holding the cup.
I don't. It is yet to be confirmed whether or not that inside part is hollow for you to be able to drink out of. I'm not too sure. Let's check. Here's the photo of the Stormers lifting up the trophy here in this past. They were recently crowned the champions here, hoisting up the UCL trophy. Still don't know whether it's hollow, but with that being said, though, MLR Shield or the UCL Championship.
You know what I'm going to base it off of? If you had no idea what they were and you found both of them,
right?
I would think that the one we're showing now is the better thing. It's worth more money. So I'm going to have to go with that over the plaque. I am. Just if you found those two on the ground, you'd be like, this thing looks like it's worth more. So
yeah, but you see this thing, you see this trophy, right? You see the trophy. Let's go back to it. You see this trophy, right? Or the United Rugby Championships, excuse me, URC. Dude, you don't even know that's a trophy, man. It looks like it looks like a spaceship part. Like I don't know what to do with this thing. I don't know. But nonetheless, I guess it's kind of cool. Matt, your thoughts?
Can we confirm whether that's a cup or not? Do we know whether that's a cup?
All right.
Regardless, whatever. Okay? I'm going to assume that it is a cup. I'm going to go with the MLR Shields.
Okay, there we go.
Okay? Because this thing is, I don't know what it is. All right? I don't know where this came from. I don't know who designed it. I mean, good on you, but I mean, the shield is it looks better, I think. Looks cleaner. This thing looks like they tried way too hard.
Yeah, to find something different.
Yeah,
I kind of agree.
It looks like they tried to be different, you know?
I kind of agree with you, Matt.
And sometimes you just got to be old fashioned. There's nothing wrong with keeping it.
You're assuming that it is hollow and it is a cup, and despite knowing that it's hollow and it is a cup, the shield still wins?
Yeah, I'm going with the shield, assuming even though that this may be hollow and you may be able to drink out of it, that looks like there's way too much going on in that one trophy.
There we go. All right, so there's the Ask TFR show.
I've got a little special one, though, but wouldn't the MLR shield go perfect with that Korean Baseball League sword?
Don't you think? I wish I had a picture of it. Vandy, have you seen this?
I'm gonna look it up.
You have to follow, dude. Search up the KBO like championship sword or something. I don't know what they must call it, the sword, because it is literally a sword.
The sponsors or something like that. But regardless, I mean, let's say one of the guys is carrying the shield, the other guy's got this massive sword. You're taking over countries with that.
Are you kidding me? Why is it going to be a katana? That thing's like straight out.
It's a huge sword. So Matthew has a point, man. We can suit out the perfect warrior here. Get the KBO sword, get the MLR shield. We're golden.
Look at that thing.
Maybe we should suggest to the MLR that the man of the match of the finals should get a sword so that they can wield the sword and the shield.
That's the coolest trophy I've ever seen in my life.
See,
the sword, the KBO sword.
The coolest trophy I've ever seen.
All right, so then out of extension, the MLR shield is the second coolest trophy that you've ever seen.
No.
Yeah, no, I think that's what you just said. I think that's what you just said. All right, so it's official. The MLR shield is the second best trophy in the entire world behind the KBO sword.
Hey, way to go,
purely because of the use that it would have in a medieval battle.
With the sword.
What if there's a post-match ruckus?
You know what? You're
After
right.
the championship match, there's a post-match ruckus.
You better hope you're playing Korean baseball.
Well, hey, that's all right. Some of them might be able to.
All right, and then last question here, guys. Bonus one here as we close out this segment of the show. There's obviously one, like the best trophy that we're missing in this whole entire discussion. And that is the Fantasy Ruckers Championship jersey here, of course, obviously. So out of all of those, I'm going to go MLR Shield, and all the other ones compared to ours, I think ours wins hands down.
Ours is cooler than the sword.
Yeah, ours is way cooler. I have no bias, too.
I mean, we kind of copped out because it's really not even like a trophy. We didn't.
Wait,
really
hold on,
design
hold on. Can you drink out of that one?
I mean, you can drink with it on. That's
If you
kind
really
of close.
tried. If you really tried, you could just soak it and wring it out.
That would be pretty nasty, man. That'd be pretty nasty. But yeah, it doesn't even compare, obviously, with our championship Fantasy Ruckers League jersey that we introduced a couple weeks ago, of course. But yeah, just an interesting segment. It was a conversation that was being had this week as we head into the MLR Championship Final. The Shield will obviously be given out this weekend to either the really, really highly touted and high-powered Rugby New York team that's coming up, or the Seattle Seawolves team that has been experienced and obviously been there multiple times before and look to add another championship to their hardware case. But nonetheless, a little bit of an interesting discussion about that hardware that they are playing for in the MLR. So yeah, I thought that'd be fun to talk about. Remember, hashtag #AskTFR show. If you want to ask us a question, make sure you hit us up there. Tag at the Fantasy Ruckers. Tag either one of us at Ye95, at Ryan J. Yee, at the Rucking Goat as well. We'll look out for that. We'd love to interact with you guys, and hopefully your question will make the next show's segment of Ask the Fantasy Ruckers show. So a little fun thing there. Let's move on, guys, here before we get to the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge update and a recap of the conference final series. A tad bit of news and notes to talk about. I will say, in this past week, watching the conference finals and where they were played, obviously one was played in New England, in Quincy, Massachusetts, over there at the Veterans Memorial Stadium, and then also played in Houston at the Aviva Stadium. It was nice to see. Two of these stadiums were pretty rugby, dedicated. They were leaning towards the rugby side. You got clear lines. It wasn't messy. The stadium was nice. They looked packed out, looked really good. And obviously, they wanted to keep that theme going for the MLR Championship Final. And I don't think a high school stadium was going to cut it for Rugby New York, who is hosting the final. So
you can fit a lot of people on that track around the field.
And on the tennis courts as well.
And
right?
on the tennis court.
You could definitely pack. Well, they said, you know what, those tennis courts, those tracks, it ain't going to cut it. It ain't going to be enough. So the MLR announcing that the Rugby New York club will host the Seattle Seawolves for the MLR Championship Final this Saturday at Red Bull Arena, where the Red Bulls play in the MLS. That's located in Harrison, New Jersey. I know, Matt, it's still not in New York, but it is an upgraded stadium that is going to be, I think, a lot of fun be showcased.
They could have picked so many stadiums in New York.
Like what?
But could they really? Could they have? I'm not sure if they could have.
Well, they could have picked one that's in New York. That's all I'm going to say. They could have picked, anywhere in New York.
No, they couldn't have. I think I think you give them a harder time, Matt. I agree with you. I'll preface it by saying I'm in the same boat as you, Matt. I hate that in a large majority of the major sports in North America that these New York teams do not play in New York. I'm with you there. But I do also have to note that it is tough for some of these New York teams with these bigger stadiums to find venues in New York due to the lack of space. There is one place that they could have maybe chosen, maybe two places they could have looked at. I would argue maybe there's some universities that you could have looked at as well. But you got to admit, though, Red Bull Arena is pretty cool. And it is going to be a cool venue to showcase with a lot of eyes on this MLR Championship Final that will air on Saturday at 12 Eastern on Fox, the main channel Fox, Big Daddy Fox. So I think it's going to be a pretty cool spectacle to have there.
There's too many rats in New York.
Yeah, come on. That's why we got the rugby team to clear them out, The Seawolves are coming in. The Sea Rats are coming in. And New York is there to clear them out.
Yeah. So
that's what's happening. Hold on. I got something to say about this, though. I mean, is it actually a home field advantage still? Is it a home field advantage? Yes. They've never played on this field, right?
Okay.
The kickers have never kicked on this field before. Okay. They have what? They're going to have – I don't even know if they're going to train there. So what? They have a few days to figure out what it's like to kick on this field. And figure out what the wind is like, how they should expect, the where they need to put the ball on the field. I mean, is it a home field advantage?
I mean, the mindset of professional athletes, they should be used to kicking on a field.
I mean, you still have Matt, you're still in the New York area. So the New York fans are still closer to that stadium than Seattle fans. Seattle has also had to travel this past week to go to New York as well. New York has not had to do that. So there are home advantage elements. Yes, it is not the stadium that they've played at all year, but I would imagine if you asked any Rugby New York player, they would still consider this home field advantage. And I would say on top of that, they would probably prefer playing at Red Bull Arena for the final than in that high school stadium that they've been playing all season long.
Fair enough, but how loud is 3,000 people going to sound in a 30,000 seated arena?
Sure, but it's still going to be cool to see on TV, I think. And I think regardless of the noise level, it's 3,000 people, it's 3,000 people. You'll have them at the stadium. They'll be just as loud as a high school stadium that they'll be at Red Bull Arena. But I think that, the MLR being able to book this kind of last minute here and be able to get them into a venue that is noteworthy of a professional sports league, because what New York was playing on before this during the season was not professional sports worthy. It is a step in the right direction. And I will say there is a little bit of a hint too.
I think the mindset probably is it's better production quality too. Like if you watched this first MLR game and it's that stadium, you'd be impressed. If you watch it and it was New York's home stadium, you'd be kind of like, what kind of league is this, man?
Great point. No, that's true. And I would think that there are going to be a lot of brand new eyes that haven't watched the entirety of this season on this final. It's on the main channel on Fox. It's at a pretty prime time on a Saturday, you could argue. And I think just with how much traction that the MLR has been building up for the entirety of this season, I think they'll have a lot of extra eyes on this year. And you're right, Vandy. To have it look like a professional production, I think is going to go a long way with that. And they have all the resources in place too. They already have TV productions at Red Bull Arena. They've been doing it all year long at Rugby New York, but obviously a high school isn't necessarily built to be able to produce that, at least with all the sight lines and all the things like that considering. So just something that's pretty cool that will be happening this weekend. Pretty pumped for that final this weekend, and it should look pretty good at Red Bull Arena this coming Saturday. And then just one last note, guys, I have to mention it every single week until this thing gets resolved. As of right now, during the recording of this podcast, there has not been any brand new information with regards to the disqualification of the LA Giltinis and the Austin Gilgronis. The same statement that we talked about last week still applies as of right now during this episode. So there's nothing brand new. I just wanted to bring it up again that it's pretty crazy that we don't have any clarification about this whole situation as of yet. I'm not sure if they're trying to wait for the MLR final to pass to kind of not make this the focal point in the talking conversation heading into this week. Nonetheless, I think the longer that you have this stew, the more people talk about it and the more people will carry this on. So I think that there should be a resolution relatively soon, but nothing as of yet from the league so far. So
is that a Gilly?
Yeah. Very, very.
Hey, you know what I saw on the weekend, though? You know what I saw? I saw some guy tweet out, imagine if it was a Rugby New York LA Giltini final. Imagine that. And I mean, I'm not going to say who I saw like it, but I think I saw somebody on Rugby New York like the tweet. So
Ed Fidow, if I had to put money on it.
So hey, it's imagine that final, if that would have happened. That would have been some high powered, high names. That would have been, I think MLR would have loved marketing that. That's for sure.
I mean, we'll get into that. And I do agree from a name perspective. Yes. From a marketing perspective, all of that, there's just a lot of superstars that you could market that game off of. I wouldn't downplay the fact that we're still not in store for a really, really good final between the Seattle Seawolves and Rugby New York. So we will get into that, all of that. But yeah, no, we're still waiting on clarification. Like I said, we will see, and you will be the first ones to hear it and how that impacts the world of fantasy rugby in the MLR when that does come out. So that being said, that's the latest news and notes. We're playing at Red Bull Arena. Still no update from the MLR with regards to the Giltinis and the Gilgronis. That's basically all you need to know as of right now. So why don't we move on to what everyone's been waiting for, and that is a recap in the fantasy performance, the studs and duds from this past week in the conference final. We had two pretty exciting matchups, the Houston SaberCats taking on the Seattle Seawolves at home, and then the New England Free Jacks taking Rugby New York on at home as well. The Houston SaberCats kicking off the weekend in their matchup, the Western Conference final matchup. Guys, before I get into the whole fantasy implication, all like that, pretty fun matchup, guys. I mean, I will start off like this. Yeah. I do think that the Seattle Seawolves basically dominated the entirety of the match. Houston did capitalize on some errors that led to SaberCats points on the board that may have pushed their point total a little bit higher. But I do think that Seattle Seawolves, from start to finish, outside of maybe a 15-minute period outside of the second half, it was the Seawolves match to win here, and I do think the better squad did come out with the win. But that being said, thoughts on this Western Conference final, Matt? I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. I mean, Houston had some flashes of really good play and taking advantage of some mistakes. They look good at a lot of portions of the game, but man, that Seattle offense is just a little bit too. They're just on a roll right now. Like I don't even know how else to put it. Is that you wouldn't expect this 8 weeks ago. This isn't something that you would have expected. You kind of saw them have their ups and downs, but right now they are just on an absolute roll, and everything seems to be clicking for them. And AJ Alatimo, I mean, he really seems to be leading from the front. That's really it. He's really just leading from the front there. 80 minutes every week, putting in a solid 80 minutes for them.
Yeah, Vandy, what about you, man?
Well, I mean, like you guys said, the better team won. Seattle has been able to put up, I think, 42 points over the last 5 weeks. I'm pretty sure they've averaged that. Just dominating showings every time they're out here. But I thought basically Houston would just get streaky. They would get a try and then get the ball back and get a field goal right after half. They got 2 tries, but then just pure possession domination game. And to touch on, AJ had a great game, but I think a big key to their success was Duncan Matthews. Mm-hmm. I think he had a dominant game. I hope he's all right. Looked like he was hurt in the last 10 minutes there, so hopefully he's good to go for the next game because they're going to need him. But, what a performance.
Yeah, I mean, Duncan Matthews had that one try where he got a little lucky with that kick, and he ended up being able to kick it all the way down the field. But, yeah, Duncan Matthews has been on a
to follow up the AJ pass. AJ got a nice assist because he wouldn't have got that.
Duncan Matthews has been on a playoff tear. He has scored 3 tries so far in the playoffs so far. So obviously exactly what you want to see from a fullback guy getting involved, obviously, in a lot of those big time plays that are scoring for Seattle. But yeah, no, I think obviously the big thing that I'm taking away from all of this, from what you guys are saying, AJ is huge, man. Like just his ability to create plays, his abilities to play make, distribute, just his ability to turn a normal looking play into one that becomes a scoring opportunity is just something that really sticks out to me. He's constantly involved. Obviously what you want to see out of a top tier fly half in the MLR, especially when you're at, a conference final as well. Just really, really cool to see how much he does get involved from the boot, from the passing, all of it. It just seems like he's always around all the time. And yeah, to touching your point, Matt, about this offense rolling, this is the last thing I have to say before I move on to the fantasy performances. It's funny because Seattle doesn't do it flashy. You know what I mean? You see some certain things from, AJ Alatimu breaking for a run or something, but it's always the same thing. And that's what I noticed from this match. It was just building up phases, spinning it out, working it up the field, score a try, or you get a line out within the 5, you maul it in with James Malcolm. It's just things that are textbook that you see from just a very experienced side, and I think that's what they're bringing into this final. it should be interesting. It's completely opposite than some of these other teams that we're seeing. Obviously, New England Free Jacks has been a big team that we've talked about in terms of big time play and explosive playability. I think Seattle Seawolves have that, but it just seems that they really do rely on just textbook type play, which they showcased here against the Houston SaberCats, who really didn't show any faults outside of some mistakes where obviously the SaberCats capitalized. But in terms of fantasy point performances, we mentioned it, AJ Alatimu continuing his big run, 12 fantasy points in this match, all of those basically coming out of the boot, in addition to 2 try assists to add in that playmaking ability in there, 4 conversions, 2 penalties, 2 try assists to go along with that. You got 50.5 points from Duncan Matthews. He scored 2 tries, 1 off of the assist from AJ Alatimu, and then that kind of athletic speed burst there to take the ball all the way to the house there on that long try that led to 15.5 points for Duncan Matthews. James Malcolm, 5.6 off of the set piece try, 8.8 for JP Smith, which was a debatable. I don't know if you guys saw it, the obstruction call. A little bit debatable. I do agree that I think they got it right. I think regardless of whether that guy was there or not, the guy bit on it. Like, he was going to follow JP Smith's fake pass.
He got sold more than the guy got in his way.
Exactly. So I had no problem with that call there. And then Ross Neal, big man Ross Neal as well, 7.1 fantasy points there. Dude, I didn't realize how tall he is. I know I sent Matt you the social media post like a while back of highlights of Ross Neal, just because he just looks like a giant among men. He celebrated with Duncan Matthews on his try, and he ran to the try zone, and you could just see they close zoomed up on Ross Neal and Duncan Matthews, and you saw Ross Neal pick up Duncan Matthews, and it was just like a big, massive.
Let's not do Duncan Matthews like that, all right? Yes, Duncan Matthews is short. All right.
No, what I'm saying is that it's more talking about how massive Ross Neal is, which is going to have a play here, I believe, in this upcoming match that they'll have with Rugby New York. But that being said, I just thought that was something that I did notice in that try celebration. And then looking on the Houston SaberCats side, Christian Dyer capitalizing on a few plays there, 13.8 fantasy points, scoring 2 tries. David, hey, this is one that I found out too, guys. I didn't realize, I think David Kotzer's last name is like called Kotza, because they kept on saying that during the play-by-play. No idea.
Because he's South African. Look, when it's South African, everything you think it sounds like, it doesn't sound like, okay?
I guess so. So
Vander Schiff? No. Vander Skyfa, okay?
There we go.
David Kotzer.
Yeah, throw it into the list of names that we have trouble pronouncing on this show. It continues to get longer and longer.
Houston Saber box. What else would you expect from them? Okay.
Exactly. I gotta practice up on my my South African, but nonetheless,
make sure you really get the Labaskagana down.
There we go. 8.9 fantasy points for David Kotza. You got 9.3 for Jerry Labuschagne. I think I got that right there. That was pretty good. And then a couple of 1-pointers for the guys that played 80 minutes plus as well, but largely most of the points coming on the Seattle Seawolves side with the amount of points that they scored. But hey, congratulations to Seattle Seawolves moving on here to the MLR Championship final. I think they earned it here. And it's funny to think that these guys were not even thinking about making the playoffs. And then with all of the commotion that was going on, they find themselves in, I believe, their 3rd MLR championship final, or the potential to win their 3rd MLR championship is pretty funny to me in a turn of events that are pretty quickly they're heading in the past final weeks. So with that being said, 46-27 final score for the Seattle Seawolves. I know Steven's going to be a little bit disappointed with his Houston SaberCats. Nonetheless, pretty big turnaround for the Houston SaberCats, who could not get a win last season and then ended up winning essentially with an asterisk, winning the Western Conference, and then, making a formidable push here against the Seattle Seawolves, but falling short in that final step.
If you're not first, you're last. So really, they finished in the same spot as last year.
Huh. For a guy that finished,
you really are a cup half empty type guy.
Yeah, for a guy that finished basically last in our in our Fantasy Ruckers League, that's how you think of it?
Last. Does that motivate you? We don't count the playoffs. Matt came last.
I think the same place as the second place guy.
I think it's because Matt is just trying to either A, demote everyone around him in our league to make everyone feel a little bit worse about their fantasy performances, so only John can enjoy this?
Yes.
Or Matt, every single day until next year's MLR fantasy draft is just telling himself, I wasn't good enough, and that's going to motivate him to hopefully make a push next season.
Well, look,
to maybe
you know
not
what?
finish last.
Now that I'm seeing where my true talent lies is, the regular season's great, but next year's Fantasy Rucker Playoff Challenge, oh boys, I'm ready for that. I'm ready. I'm scouting right now. I'm writing down notes for the Fantasy Rucker Playoff Challenge, and I'm there.
It's okay. So you'll take being the punching bag of the Fantasy Ruckers League as long as you can continue find your success on the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge.
I'm okay being the toilet bowl legend,
Okay.
There's nothing wrong.
You weren't even a toilet bowl legend. You lost.
But I was a finalist. I'm in the
toilet bowl. But you said that second place. So okay, what does that make you?
If you're second,
if you're second place of the last place trophy,
yeah.
What does that make you?
Ratatouille. I'm down the drain, man.
Okay, well, there's something to pick at there, but yeah, let's move on here to the next matchup here, the Eastern Conference Final. Even more exciting, I would say, than the Western Conference Final.
Well,
a little bit more
MLR
physical,
final.
a little bit more tight there for the entirety of the match. Essentially, I think 70 minutes of the match was within one score of each other, which you really couldn't ask for anything better in a different final. The New England Free Jacks taking on Rugby New York in Quincy, Massachusetts. Rugby New York coming on top here, 24-16. Absolutely incredible job by Rugby New York here, and got to give a shout out to friend of the show, Andrew Coe as well, getting man of the match there, being involved in literally every single scoring play for this Rugby New York side. Completely incredible. So wanted to give him a shout out there. We'll talk about more about him here in this breakdown. But yeah, thoughts on this game, guys?
I mean, just on that note, he had to. So he had to come out with that performance in the second half, because at the start of the second half, the guy decided to throw the loopiest of loopy passes right to the New England Free Jack defense on a counterattack, and decided to say, yeah, here, take this. I'll let you score a try. And honestly, I had flashbacks to the first time that they played in New York, where New England Free Jacks, I think, scored 2 intercept tries. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh no, this is not it for New York. This is not good. And then Andrew Coe turned it around. He was catching high balls. He was finishing plays. He was creating plays.
He was dominant at that high ball,
man. An absolute legend. He was chasing guys around with a hurt shoulder. I don't know if you saw him, but at one point he was running around like this and running around with one arm like this.
He made a tackle and he's holding his arm. He literally makes a tackle.
Trying to make tackles and stuff.
How can you wrap him if he's holding his arm?
Have you ever seen there's a funny like meme on Reddit that I saw where there's like this crab that has kind of like this arm that's like hanging off, and then he just comes over and just like peels his claw off and like throws it away. That was Coe. He was just like, I don't need this arm anymore. I can do this without it. That's okay. I can make these hits. But yeah, no, it's incredible to me. For a guy, and I don't know what the lineup was going to look like if Ed Fidow was not injured last match. I don't know if they would have gone with Coe coming off the bench or whatnot. But when Coe is in the game and he's in the starting lineup for Rugby New York, it is incredible to me how much they integrate his aerial threat into the offense. They were looking to kick it into his space. Just his ability to catch that high ball. I mean, they put it up he wasn't involved on the first try in terms of catching the high ball. Hayden took a really good take there. He got the offload from him. But just constantly, if you have that on the outside, man, it's something you always got to watch out for. And then to add on top of that you're looking out for Waisake Nahalo and Nahim Milner-Scudder on top of that as well, just as threats on the outside in terms of speed, athleticism, and their rugby knowledge and talent. It's tough, man. It's got to be tough. And yeah, couldn't be more happier for Coe in the terms of the performance that he had and the opportunity he was given with Ed Fidow out, and then also just making the most of it and getting, rightfully so, named player of the match. So it was cool to see him after the match talk about that as well.
Outside of him, though, I'm going to give a big shout out to New York defense. They had some goal line stands that were just courageous. I mean, some of those goal line stands really, I think, is where they won. They could have easily been down a few tries after some of those. I mean, they took penalties, they knocked the ball on, they really hurt themselves. But when it came to stopping New England Free Jacks on the goal line, they stepped up and they said, yeah, like we're gonna make up for our mistakes, and we're gonna make sure that they don't score on this goal line.
Well, let's talk about that, Matt.
Well,
and I think Vandy, you mentioned it.
I want to interject just real quick.
Yeah.
As a completely neutral, and like I want to say completely neutral, because I would say, no, don't get upset, but your opinions are slightly swayed one way because you're really good friends with Andrew Coe.
Right.
So my one tidbit I would say from this game is I've been crediting officials all year on their ability to I don't want to say dictate the game, but stay out of it, but still be the required force needed. This is the one time where I would say I thought it was very biased. And I let me defend it for a second. There was a play, and it was number 7 on Rugby New York, Brendan O'Connor. He makes a great play to go over top the guy in the breakdown, and to stop him from being able to put the ball out, they get the penalty. Okay, now they come all the way down the field in that same, in that same play, boom, they get the ball, they go down, make the play, and then Peretti on New England does the same exact thing, the same exact play, and gets a penalty. And the announcer literally goes, okay, if you're going to call it on one end, you got to call it on both ends. And then they kind of said the player might have pushed him. And then you look at the review, and it was so clear cut to me. And then there was a knock on that was called that would have led to a New England try, which also got called a knock on, which didn't get called the other way. And they touched on that. And then, to kick it off, Bodine Waka, that was a high tackle. And whether it wasn't a yellow card or not, I thought it was a very high tackle with no intent to wrap. So, I mean, once again, I have very limited knowledge of the game, but what I can say is that hit was penalized in weeks prior.
You're talking about my boyfriend. You're talking about my boy Federico, though? You're chirping my boy Federico?
Hey, great play by Rugby New York. They deserve to win the game. They deserve to win the game, but I have to just say that I felt the ref interjected in this game.
This is why I wanted to kind of shift over here, because I wanted to go back to, I think this was one of the most even matches in this entire weekend, in the entire playoff championship. Yep. I think you mentioned it, Vandy, at the top of this conversation when we first getting into this matchup, that this, for a lot of people, especially with all the disqualifications and things like that happened prior to the postseason, this was the final for a lot of people. These were the two best teams remaining in the MLR. Both of them being in the Eastern Conference final. Obviously, they had to play now. I didn't notice anything of lopsided reffing. I thought that there were also missed calls on the other end as well. I mean, we talk about how. I mean,
think about that knock on that was clearly a knock on where New England just went for like a 70-yard run, like 70-meter run off of. I mean, I watched the ball hit the dude's hands and travel forward, and it was like, yeah, no, play on. So I think they were going both ways. And I mean,
there was other things, like there was that stand with Rugby New York, who constantly had that scrum at the 5-meter line. I feel like they could have been at some point a penalty try that was given there. I feel like there were decisions, I think, on both ends that could have been made, and obviously were a little bit maybe skewed one way or the other. But nonetheless, I think I agree with you, Vandy, that the better team in this match. One, it's hard to say, because I think at the end of the day, but when it came down to the Free Jacks and Rugby New York, it was just that Rugby New York happened to convert on one more play, because they both had opportunities and they both made mistakes at either end. So it was not like that, one team was being given calls or whatever like that, and that led to one of the scoring. But they both had ample amount of opportunity in both offensive zones where they could have capitalized. I mean, we talk about Balikana, who could have touched it down, missed it, and then we talk about Nick Savetta at the end of the first half, who got it and then almost touched it down and knocked on. So there's a lot of really, really close moments in this match that could have went either way, that I think wipes out any ambiguity between these two teams. It was an exciting match. It came down to the wire. You love to see matches decided within the last 10 minutes. I think up until the 70th minute or up until the 65th minute, before Nehemiah Scudder was able to find the try line, it was as even as it could get. And it showed in the score line, because it was only up by those two kicks from Bodie and Waka that really made that difference. But then it was just, once New York was able to get that, not the questionable yellow card, but obviously not giving penalty the other way to Rugby New York, maybe a potential yellow card against for that, questionable call on
I thought
Bodie
they should have
Waka.
just been offsetting. If you're going to give one.
It's tough. It's tough because I would say, I think Matthew,
Yeah. I mean, I'll get into a little bit of the rugby law, but basically, if the hit on Waka wasn't a yellow, so if the hit on Waka is just a penalty, and the tip tackle on Hayden is a yellow because letter of the law, if you tip a guy over the forget what it's called, but you tip him over the whatever
the
angle,
plane.
The plane, and he lands on his shoulder or his head, automatically yellow, right?
Okay.
If that is a yellow, that penalty automatically takes preceding and overpowers the less harsh infringement. So regardless if it happened after, you're not going to give a yellow and then give the penalty to New England Free Jacks. It's going to be the penalty that happened that was more harsh, that was a yellow, is going to be the one that stands, because there's no way. It's like saying in hockey, like a 5-minute major offsetted with a 2-minute minor.
I think.
I just want to interject in there real quick. Then that tells me that with that mindset, you could throw a questionable hit. Because now you've seen that a harsher play that will be called. So did he take a chance on Bodine?
I think the ultimate decision
that was more egregious,
I think the ultimate
blatant.
decision lies on whether or not you think that hit on Bodine Waka was or was not a yellow card. Because regardless of whether there was a penalty on the line, obviously by not handing, who was it that made the hit? Kiri, I think. Yeah. Antonio Kiri that made the hit. Obviously, with no yellow card being handed out to him, the referees did not think that was a yellow card offense. Okay. Would it have been a high tackle offense? Yep. Probably. Yeah, it probably would have been a high tackle offense. Yep. But because of the superseding yellow card, it was a tough situation, obviously, and with the timing on top of that being, only 10 minutes left in the match, a score 1 point down. It was a tough situation, but nonetheless handled well.
One thing I will say, I don't want to
be
complete flip topic here. The one thing is watching the rugby or watching the game, Rugby New York, you heard more names. You heard Milner Scudder have a good game, Wasaki Nahalo, Andrew Coe, Jack Hunton, Andy Ellis. I remember hearing those names and I can remember plays. But besides really Bodine Waka and a couple
Kennedy had a good game.
Who else had a game? Mitch Wilson didn't really do anything.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't hear his name a lot. I mean,
Paula Bellakina dropped the one chance he had to be a difference.
I would say Peretti had.
New York had names, and those names showed up, and that's why they won. They're veteran guys. They seem to have and like you guys said, they figured out. Okay, we got Cohen. We're not going to just bash our heads with the same game plan. We got Cohen now. Let's run what he's good at.
Right. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that when you look at Rugby New York and you think about those big name guys, but even with those big name guys, even with the names that maybe you don't say as much, but I think that they're really being driven around the park by Andy Ellis, and that you can tell that his impact and his experience is really showing for this side, because
on the one Andrew Cole try, he fakes it the one way, and they really highlight it was so dirty. And he fakes it the one way and then acts like it was a juke, but really it was just it was like a handoff in the air. And it was so dirty and allowed their guy to just hit that line with so much speed.
And it wasn't the first time they did that, right? It was multiple times hey, this.
And he didn't see the guy coming. It's such a set play, and it's just like a fake, and he just threw it in the air. And if that guy's not there, that's an easy pick. But they
were practicing that in training for sure. And they were just
beautiful.
Saying, hey, beautiful. This is what we can do.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, no, absolutely incredible. And I will add to that too, Vandy, is that I think Matt is emphasizing not only just his skill level in terms of his rugby talent, being able to hand off those passes too, but at the scrum half position, being able to direct and be kind of that floor general, that guy at the back, directing where the people should go, really dictating the flow of the game, the direction of the game, the pace of the game. Andy Ellis, having that guy at that pivotal position is absolutely incredible to have that. And obviously, like Matt mentioned, you can really see that as well. But yeah, like we mentioned, I think it was close both ways. I think that it really ended up just being Rugby New York converting on a couple more times there. It did feel like that Rugby New York was able to kind of neutralize the big time play ability that we've seen in the regular season through the New England Free Jacks. I mean, that's basically how they scored their first try in the early moments of the game, right? It was a classic. It wasn't anything special, but it was one play that got them essentially down to the 5-meter line. And then it was Bodine Walker coming out to the other side and ended up getting the rewards of that whole sequence of events. But it was ultimately a big play that led to that. And I think from that point on, there were big plays, but like you mentioned, Matt, Rugby New York was really able to stand tall in those key moments and stop them at those points in time. New England was able to do that as well, but it was just one more time that Rugby New York was able to do it that essentially got them the victory here.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll just add is that I think it was clear that New York made more mistakes than New England Free Jacks. I thought New York, they gave up a bit more penalties. I think they knocked the ball on a bit more. They had more handling errors. But it was just, like you said, it was the team that was able to convert and say, hey, like, I'm going to convert on that mistake. And New England just, whether it was New York D was able to kind of make up for their mistakes or New England just wasn't able to convert this game. Regardless, those are kind of the great games that you love to see. A lot of scoring chances, being able to try and capitalize on mistakes and just going back and forth. And it really came down to the last 10 minutes and old Sammy Windsor coming on and sealing the deal.
Yeah. No, by far. I mean, like we mentioned, they mistakes were had on both sides. It's just, the conversions kind of lopped in Rugby New York's favor there by the end of that 80-minute call. Going through some fantasy performances here, low scoring game, so not necessarily that much scoring in the terms of fantasy perspective, but still points to be had. I know some of the Canadian guys in a part of our Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is going to be happy. They went with as many Canadians as they could get in terms of representation in the MLR playoffs. So they went with Andrew Coe. They're the only guys that went with Andrew Coe, and they'll be reaping the rewards. Rugby Morning did message to us. He was like, dude, you guys aren't even going to go with Andrew Coe, your boy, even though you've been hyping him up this whole season. You're not going to go with him in your Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. Hey, he didn't fit. How can you not choose, big time teammates in Wysocki and Hollow and the MLR Scudder? The name value is just, too enticing there. But nonetheless, we're obviously paying the dues here, seeing Andrew Coe being the only guy that has scored.
You can't let your heart get in the way of dubs. All right.
It's true. The problems, we all know this for firsthand, playing fantasy rugby and playing in other fantasy sports too. When you get your heart involved in your fantasy teams, it only leads to bad things. We all know that. Some other guys here, Benjamin Bonasso finding the try line, 6.5 fantasy points. Jason Emery doing a little bit from the boot there. Very interesting to kind of figure out what the heck is going on in terms of this kicking situation with Rugby New York. I don't know if it's Emery at the start, and then when Windsor comes in, it's all Windsor.
I don't think anybody picked New York kickers or fly halves.
You're right, but I guess I'm just saying, like, in terms of the future in Rugby New York, Rugby New York land, what's going to happen. But yeah, luckily no one chose them in the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. And then MLR Scudder with a try for him, 6.1 fantasy points as well on that, ending up being the game winning try for the Rugby New York to book their ticket to the MLR Championship Final. And then looking here for the New England Free Jacks side of things, Bodine Waka obviously coming through here, like he always does from a fantasy perspective. 12.4 fantasy points. He had the 80 minutes played, scored that try from about 9 meters out, and then obviously with the boot, 3 penalties, 1 conversion. I just gotta say, just to Hoki's point that he mentioned a few weeks ago in terms of having guys that are involved and having guys that are on that spine of the offense. And I think, Matt, you mentioned this as well too, just finding guys that are heavily involved in the offense. Bodine Waka's try in this match completely outlines that perfectly. I mean, he's on one end, right? He's on the far right side supporting, doesn't even touch the ball. He's just there supporting the offense there when they made the big break, gets into the breakdown, they roll it over. And then literally the next couple phases over, you find him on the completely opposite side, finding himself the ball and ultimately scoring the try. Seeing a guy that heavily involved, those are the types of guys that you want in fantasy rugby, whatever position that they play, whether it's fly half, fullback, back row, the guys that are just moving around the field and just finding opportunities to score. I think that was the textbook kind of example of what you were explaining, what Hokie was explaining a couple of weeks ago in terms of fantasy strategy. So it was cool to see that. Kind of something that I'm regretting too, not putting Milner Scudder in my lineup, going with Wysocki and Ahalo, knowing that Milner Scudder is at the fullback position. You just know, and you can see it obviously in this match too. He's just so much more involved being at that fullback position. Dude, it just seems like he's touching the ball a lot more.
When he scored his try, the announcer goes, Milner Scudder's is about as strong as a gas station coffee.
Leave it to the MLR commentators to come up with the catchiest of catchphrases. But yeah, no, it was cool to see that 12.4 points. Obviously, that try by Bodie Walker being a big deal of that. And really on New England, there really wasn't anyone else outside Leroux Malin who got 3 points on a try assist off of that try. That really there was nothing else from this New England Free Jacks side, which is crazy because a lot of people had New England Free Jacks stock heading into this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, which we're going to go over right now. But before we move over here, any last thoughts on New England Free Jacks, Rugby New York, even Houston SaberCats, Seattle Seawolves, anything that stuck out to you in this conference finals?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing you talked about, I think you talked about this earlier, about how the stadiums, it looked nice to see all the rugby stadiums with the packed crowds, But man, I guess to add to that, there's a lot of sad people in those stadiums walking away from that after the game, eh? So yeah, I guess
it is true. Yeah, both of the home teams lost it. Both the teams, the higher seeds, lost in that match. Interesting.
Better watch out, Rugby New York.
Hey, that's not their home stadium.
Oh my gosh! All right, we're moving on, man. Your vendettas against these things. It's funny. You have like, okay, so I think we can list. We need to start creating a list, and maybe we'll put it behind me. The list that I think irks Matt completely the wrong way. One of them is that Rugby New York plays in New Jersey.
Okay, but I wasn't even thinking about it. This literally is not their home stadium.
Okay.
Gilchrist.
Okay.
Anything with Gilchrist.
Anything with Gilchrist.
Anything with Gilchrist, except his beers. I love his beers. Sponsor me.
The production quality in the MLR.
Production quality got better throughout the year. It looks good in these finals. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it does. You know what?
It does.
It looks good. I like it. I honestly think the commentators.
I mean, that Houston Sun got a little tough there for a bit.
The only thing that I still can't handle is please just stop trying to do the sideline reporters like the NFL.
That's the only thing I would say.
Just please. Like, if you are showing the camera view of your sideline reporter and the game is going on, I'm sorry, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, there's not enough downtime like football for you to be going to sideline.
But
and
this
like
is way too
you can do a sideline interview, I think, like with off cam, and they do that in this Super Rugby and all that. Like they have a sideline reporter, they just don't have that person go on camera so that no one misses anything. They're trying to kind of depict, I think, this football thing where you get the in-person interview on the sideline. Yeah, not really loving it because you do sometimes miss some big-time plays. Nonetheless, you're right, Matt. I think it's been improving all season long, and that's
what are you writing down there, Vandy?
He's writing down notes for next year. He's
nothing.
So okay, all right, let's move on here, guys. It is now time. What a lot of people have been waiting for is an update to the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. So we're gonna break down the standings here.
Yeah,
we mentioned it at the top of the show. There are two familiar names on the top rankings list that you are going to be well known here over the past 24 episodes that you've been following along here. But it is, drum roll please.
No.
Hey, come on. Have some respect for the champ, Vandy.
It is JJ Tolton, who's leading the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. And this is the same guy.
No, have some respect for the champ, Vandy.
This is the guy
that name is on the jersey behind the commissioner's head there. Have some respect.
Right. So for those of you who are just tagging along here and are just tuning in for the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, JJ Tolton, the owner of Lads on Tour, was the one who won our very first inaugural season of the Fantasy Ruckers League.
He
told us when we presented him the trophy and when we were going through and gave him his little victory lap for him to boast about how good he is at fantasy rugby in the MLR, and he won the first thing and all of that, which he did take advantage of. He said that he wasn't going to join this thing. No,
he had the guts to say, I am going to take a step back and, take a step back from fantasy rugby and, maybe not submit a lineup. And I thought, oh, perfect. I don't have to deal with the champ. But here we are, me and the champ at the top dueling it out. The top and the bottom dueling it out at the top.
Well, that alludes me to the next person that I need to call out here. The man who is sitting in 7th place and last place for a majority of the fantasy rugby season.
I was 7 sometimes.
You were 7 sometimes. Is now sitting in 2nd place in the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. And he was first last week, and he dropped down to number 2, but clearly he's not letting that little slight drop into 2nd place phase his confidence going into this final week of the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge.
It's me and the champ. What do I got to complain about? Me and the champ just sitting at the top, sipping gillies. What can I say?
What do you think, disgusted, Vandy?
I'm disgusted.
Hey, man, that's all right. It's all right to be 7th again.
All right, so I think it's absolutely hilarious. I think it's absolutely hilarious that the person that won our fantasy rugby league, our very first fantasy rugby league, and the guy who essentially finished last. I love also the fact that we've just taken it for a fact that Matt is the last place person in our league. Vandy, you technically finished last, but everyone I think just takes it. No. That being said,
not count? How do you get the MLR
last place? When have they ever counted? Look at them.
All right, we got to move on here. We got to move on here to the rest of the rankings. So yes, JJ Tolton here at the top of the rankings with 46.1 total points. So the former champ or the current champion of our Fantasy Ruckers League is looking to get another title in 2 years. As soccer players would know it, or soccer people that watch soccer, he's going for the double. Matt Yee is looking to get his first title here, sitting not too far behind him with 41 fantasy points. And this is where it starts to taper down. And barring some miracle, the people now that I'm going to list are going to need some big time performances here from players.
From their players who are eliminated.
From some players here for the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge to make an impact as Vandy leaves the camera here in absolute disgust. Surprisingly, your commish, yours truly, is sitting here at 3rd place, and I think that's pretty dang good for the guy who created the Fantasy Ruckers League and essentially created fantasy rugby in the MLR, is sitting at 3rd place here at 27.9 fantasy points.
Hey, way to go, Commish.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I feel like there would be something wrong. It's more of like a sigh of relief of me being, relatively competitive in this thing, because I feel like it would be a bad look to have the guy who literally put this together to not be competitive. Like, I'm supposed to know this thing inside and out, and if I have guys beating me, that's not a good look for the fantasy.
Well, hey, it's all right. You're losing to the champ and the toilet bowl legend. There's not much you can do about it.
You're not the toilet bowl legend.
I'm the toilet bowl legend.
We're not going to let
Move
this
on.
stick. As of right now, Steven is the toilet bowl legend. All right,
I'm toilet bowl legend.
Fourth is actually MLR All Access is Stacey Pates.
Oh my goodness, what a legend.
Absolutely incredible. Stacey's lineup, let me just pull it up here. Stacey's lineup consists of Kyle Sekera, Wynan Grassman, Bodine Waka, Christian Dyer, and New England Free Jacks. Yes, it is all see ya, guys. I get that. But big performances from Bodine Waka and Christian Dyer bumped her up into 4th place, at least for now, in our Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. You got Brian Ray of the rugby of America's Rugby News sitting there at 5th place with 23.9 fantasy points. And then you got some of the names rolling in. Hokie at 23.2, Derek Brissett, 21.4 points of the La Rouge Rugby Podcast. Zach Lanning as well, 19.4 fantasy points, tied in 10th spot. Sorry, I forgot James Dealey of MLR Stats. His stats coming in handy. He's hanging in there at 8, tied for 8th place with 20.4 fantasy points. And then rushing through the last ones here, Alistair Kirsch-Poole of Glorious Rugby, 19.4 fantasy points, tied with Fantasy Rugby Geek at 10th with Zach Lanning. Devin Vanderpool finally coming in at 17.4 fantasy points, sitting at 13th place. How does it feel, man?
I'm going to kill somebody.
Why, dude? Come on.
No.
Dean Mercy.
It's what I deserve.
Your lineup, okay, consisting of Dean Muir, didn't really pay off for you. Andrew Duratalo, he's still in, Matt, so he could still do something. Bodine Waka, tough. Wayne Vanderbank,
Bye-bye.
tough, and Houston SaberCats.
Maybe next
So you're
year.
hoping for a massive like 3-try performance from Duratalo, and that can maybe get you it, because I think you're the only guy that owns him in this whole Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. So when you tune in on Saturday at 12, that's the only name you're looking out for.
Beautiful.
And then just rolling out some of the final names under Devin Vanderpool.
There's people under him?
Rugby Morning at 14th
I didn't
spot.
know that either.
John Payne at 15th with 14.4 fantasy
His whole
points for
team
him.
is New England Free Jacks.
Rugby Morning for 16.9 fantasy points. And then Steven, unfortunately, 5.5 fantasy points for him, sitting there at the low end of the list there at 16th spot. And then Kobe Marshall, part of the Rugby wrap-up as well, 17 fantasy points.
That's wrapped up
as well. Yeah, that's well. And sorry, I think I just got to clarify there just some names out there. Zach Lanning's part of Rugby Wrap Up, who's at 10th spot. And then we had Stu Hardy and Derek Brissett of the LaRouge Rugby Podcast. Stu Hardy sitting at that 8th spot, just behind his buddy there. But yeah, big performances by Andrew Coe for both these guys pulling in through. So yeah, the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, a little bit tough for some people, but it does seem like it is coming down to two of our very own in the Fantasy Ruckers League. John, the former champ, and then the former not toilet bowl legend. No, the toilet bowl loser, because you did leave to Steven, 41 fantasy points, trailing John by 5. How does it feel, man, before we move on here?
You asking me or you asking Manny how it feels to be in 13?
No, I think we clearly know how Vandy feels. He's got out of his seat about a few times here, and his face about says it all about how he's feeling through this whole entire thing. But I'll give you one last time here, because I can imagine next show you're probably going to be starting off the top if you do win this thing right off the bat, letting everyone know. So I'll give you one last time on this show to give your final words here before the final week of this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge.
I'm just gonna say, like, what was this stat? 90-something% of you went Waka Flocka Flame.
It's true.
You guys were sleeping on
81%.
Alatimu. And me and JJ sitting at the top, we're reaping the rewards.
It does seem like that was the strategy before I head on to move on here to a preview of the big final coming up this weekend. It does seem like the strategy here was to go all in on this whole thing and pick the teams that you thought were going to make the final, and then have that, play the most games. So Matt, that's obviously playing in your favor with Seattle Seawolves and Rugby New York both making the final, and also both having the most number of games played in this whole thing, in this playoff, is going to play into your advantage. So it might be something that people are looking forward in the playoff challenges to come. But I do think that all the cards kind of fell in your favor, which, hey, maybe that's the strategy you got to go. You go all in, or you go all in or all out.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. I might seem pretty confident in the show, but I was worried for a bit because, all season my picks were not going any of the ways that I said they would go. I think I was 0-100 or something like that all season. So thank goodness it came in when it mattered.
There you go. Well, we'll see whether or not you can stick in that second place spot, or hey, maybe you can beat John with some big performances from your guys. I think for anyone listening out there and are following along on the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, I think while I work out the scenarios for Matt, because you guys both have obviously AJ Alatimu, who seems to be the league winner for this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. The difference is Fawcett, Kiri, and Nahalo. John has James Malcolm, Bonasso, and Ed Fido. So depending on if Ed Fido plays this week, could change things, but we'll see whether or not those are the guys that are going to have a big impact in this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. So for anyone listening out there, if you want to stay tuned and stay on top of how this whole challenge has been going, it's been a lot of fun so far. And thank you again to all of our participants who have been tagging along on this challenge as well. We got Derek Brissett and Stu Hardy of LaRouge Rugby Podcast, like I mentioned, Zach Lanning, Kobe Marshall, Rugby Wrap Up, Fantasy Rugby Geek, Glorious Rugby, MLR Stats, Rugby Morning. The list goes on and on and on. Just really, really grateful. Stacey Pates of MLR All Access. Yeah, really grateful for have all you guys tuning in and tagging along. But if you're new to this thing and you're just finding out about this challenge, look it up. Hashtag the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. It's been a lot of fun. Everyone's lineups are up there on our social media pages as well. You'll want to check all that out as we head into this final week of both the MLR playoffs and the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. So with that being said, let's move on here to a quick preview of this MLR final. It's going to be a really, really fun one, guys. An experienced Seattle Seawolves team that has been here before takes on this hot, brand new Rugby New York team that has been bringing on these big signings, big time names, has been grinding through this 2022 season. Face some adversity here and there. Same with the Seattle Seawolves, facing adversity, not even knowing if they're going to be in the playoff to start off this whole thing. And then now they find themselves in an MLR championship final. Guys, initial thoughts about this heavyweight matchup between the Seawolves and Rugby New York?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say this. I think that this is something I was thinking about earlier in the show. And just that I'm not sure that the Seawolves have seen the defense that I think Rugby New York is going to bring. I don't think they've seen that from San Diego or Houston, but if you remember kind of the Rugby New York kind of style of at least when they played, when they played Atlanta, when they played New England Free Jacks, it's really that hard line speed, get up in your face, make you make a decision, make you move the ball quick. I don't think Seattle has really seen that as much this playoffs, and it'll be interesting to see how they're able to deal with that. But I definitely think that Seattle Seawolves kind of just ability to attack in both, using the maul, using the forward pack, using the back line as well, having that electric back line. I think it's just going to be really show for a really great game because New York, at the end of the day, they're the same. They can use their forwards, they can use their back line. And I'm kind of hoping that it's just going to be a shootout. But that's not how finals rugby is. And we all know it's going to be a hard fought game and tries are going to not come easy. But yeah, I'll save my prediction for now until after. Maybe.
Yeah, we'll save the predictions for the end. We'll say the prediction. We did do an initial pre-playoff prediction, but we'll lock in our final picks here in just a moment's time. But Vandy, initial reaction to Seawolves Rugby New York.
Yeah, I think Matt pretty much touched on all the major points, but I really hope it does have all the mix-ins for like a big blow-up game, like a great finals, because everybody, and we've said it too, it felt like the finals already played out this weekend with Rugby New York and New England. So hopefully it's just fireworks and we were completely wrong and this was the game we were all hoping for.
Yeah. No,
I think we're in for a surprise, boys. I think we're in for a surprise because this Seattle Seawolves is not the team that was 8 and whatever. This is the Seattle Seawolves team that is never lost a playoff game, has just come back-to-back blowout wins against 2 pretty good sides that were better than them. I think we're in for a treat and in a great venue. Again, I'll say it that I think that this might have an effect on Rugby New York, just because it's not where they've played before. They're not going to feel like they're on their home turf, but then again, it's Red Bull Arena, and I'm sure they'll be able to get up for it.
Yeah, no, and I'll just add here quickly to Matt's point about the home field advantage. To be fair, they were able to get things done being in New England, and now you're basically on a brand new field, but you're just going to have your fans and
when you think about
your area.
They've played in New England more than they've played in this field.
Sure. Fair enough. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. But still, I don't think necessarily that's how I think of home field advantage. But nonetheless, what I do think was very surprising that is going to be between these two teams, Matt, I think you nailed it right on the head, about how Seattle has been surprisingly consistent and good towards the latter portion of this kind of push that they've been having here to buy their ticket into the final. And I think what's going to be very, very interesting is that these two teams are very, very similar, especially how they played in these past conference finals. They build phases. They play rugby the right way. They don't, it's nothing flashy. It's nothing pretty. They're able to build phase, but I think they do have the ability in times. We've seen it from AJ Alatimu. We've seen it obviously from Andrew Coe, from Nahum Miller-Scudder, their ability, Waisaki Naholo, their ability to make big plays as well. So they both have those abilities, but at the core of it, they play rugby the right way. They play physical. So I think that's where we're going to have this really good matchup between these two sides that are going to be physical, that are going to be in the trenches and really, playing hard-nosed defense. And I do think, as much as I want a high-scoring game to happen, it's a final. Two teams that play very well defensively when they're turned on. I think it's going to be tough to have points scored by. Hey, maybe that's good for you and AJ Alatimu, and maybe there'll be a lot of points from the boot because of that. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be a very entertaining match. One thing I do want to note, and this is why Brett brought up Ross Neal's height earlier in the show. If Ed Fido is still injured and ends up not being able to start this upcoming weekend, and we still have the appearance of Andrew Coe coming in, and I do think regardless, especially off of his performance from this past weekend, I'll obviously preface it by saying that he is a friend of the show and we're a little bit biased here, but I do think it's hard to put Andrew Coe on the bench after what he was able to do against New England Free Jacks this past week. But with that being said, there may be an argument to have that he may not be as lethal in the air when it comes to the kicking game because of Ross Neal. If they decide to match up Ross Neal on that same side that Andrew Coe is on, what's Ross Neal? Like 6'4", I think, 6'5", or something? He's a winger. He knows how to somewhat take the ball in the air. He's going to be, I think, a challenge for Andrew Coe. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Rugby New York considers that in the kicking game and whether or not that'll be, something to think of. Because that, like we mentioned, they've been looking for Andrew Coe up in the air, especially when I was hearing from the commentators, like when Sam Windsor hopped on, ran right over to Coe and was like, hey, man, just get ready for that thing that we practiced, basically every single day of the week. And we heard it from Coe, too. They practice it all the time, too, right? Yep. So it'll be interesting whether or not they still turn to that if Andrew Coe starts this upcoming week. But let's get to it. I think we mentioned our reactions and our thoughts on the whole thing, but what are our picks? Who do we think is actually going to win? I believe, Vandy, you said a couple weeks ago when we started this predictions pre-playoffs, it was New England. Matt and I went with Rugby New York, but I think we are all up in the air here. We can change our picks, do whatever with now that what we know with the teams that are heading into these championship final this upcoming week. Matt, I'll start with you. Who is coming away with the 2022 MLR, the beautiful 2022 MLR shield that we showed at the top of the show?
Yeah, so everybody keeps talking about how much experience the Seattle Seawolves side has. Let's just kind of go through the Rugby New York side of Andy Ellis, World Cup All Black veteran, Nahum Miller-Scudder, World Cup winner, Waisaki Naholo, World Cup winner. Coe has been to the World Cup. Savetta has played overseas. All these boys have been in arguably bigger stages with bigger crowds.
Olympics for Coe. I'll just
Olympic for Coe as well. Where bigger stages, bigger crowds, bigger noise. Just because it is in the MLR finals doesn't mean these boys don't have experience playing at the highest level and on the biggest stages. I'm going to give it to the Rugby New York boys. I think that they'll come out and they'll really show their class and hone in on their mistakes, because I think they've been getting better as well throughout this playoffs, and they're going to peak at the right time here.
Yeah, what about you, Vanny?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think all good things come to an end. I think the Seattle's winning streak in the playoffs here comes to an end. I just can't see them being able to, just looking at the schedule here and, the weeks prior, they 2 games were against the Legion, 2 were against Houston, and then 1 was against Dallas. So these 5, or was it Dallas? So, all these big point games that they've gotten, the 42-point game average, it's all on teams that were kind of bottom half, I would say. So I think they're in for a rude awakening. Rugby New York had to play better teams to get to where they are. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because I do think that on paper that these two teams may not seem as close as they actually are, because you look at all these big names on Rugby New York and you're like, oh my God, they got Nahum Miller-Scudder, they got Andy Ellis, they got, Waisaki Naholo, they got all these guys that we have become so accustomed to all season long to be like, oh my God, these guys are going to have such a big impact on this game. And it's interesting because Seattle doesn't have that, but I do think in certain positions, they do have guys that I would prefer over this Rugby New York side. You know, you could argue that having the unit that Seattle's had in terms of their front pack and the consistency that they've had, the dominance that they've shown up there, also keeping in mind that this is a pack that's been together and been through these championship runs together, it goes a long way with that. I don't think, you know, as much as these guys have experience on Rugby New York's side of being on the world stage and being in these high pressure moments, I think there is a lot to be said about being in those high pressure moments as a unit. And I think the pack on Seattle has been able to do that and you know, may be able to show those moments of resiliency in this upcoming match in this final. In addition to that, I think that Seattle has a better 10 than the Rugby New York. I think AJ Alatimu is one of the better 10s in there, and having an advantage at that position is also a big advantage. Now, when it comes to the centers, when it comes to the playmakers on the outside, I think Rugby New York has that by a landslide, like what we mentioned with those big time names. So I don't think at the end of the day that, you know, it's as lopsided as some people may think. But with that being said, I mentioned it's going to be an even game. These guys play a lot of the same way. But what's going to give guys the edge is going to be what New York has paid for, what they have built for all season long. It's going to be that signing of Waisaka and Ahalo in midseason. It's going to be the signing of Nehe Milner-Scudder. It's going to be, you know, the depth that they have in those areas with those superstars that are going to make the difference, I feel like, at the end of the day, and it will be Rugby New York that comes away with the MLR 2022.
Took the long way around.
Took the long way around. I thought I had to mention that and make sure that, you know, it is going to be a very exciting match. I think this final on Saturday, 12 o'clock Eastern on Big Daddy Fox. Going to be a lot of fun. I think it's been an interesting season, boys, and to find it finally come to an end this year with the finale against two teams that I think have been arguing all season long, maybe not as the best teams in the MLR, but at least among the top teams in the MLR. I think we're going to be in for a treat this coming Saturday, that's for sure. Any final thoughts heading into finals week, baby? Not only are we going to find out the MLR champion, but also the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge champion as well.
Hey, you know, it's just me and JJ chilling at the top. No big deal. We're just enjoying life there at the top. Nobody's really going to catch us. So, just look out. It should be an exciting game this weekend nonetheless, with or without Fantasy Rucker Playoff Challenge. But the Fantasy Rucker Playoff Challenge just makes it that much more fun.
Absolutely. What about you, Vanny? Any last words, dude?
No, I'm good, brother.
He's all good. All right, well, we'll see whether or not
one more time
Matt's about tired him out with all of his talk. All of his talk. But yeah, make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode. We are going to reveal the winner of the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. You'll find out whether or not Matt was able to hold his own there and surpass John and maybe win his first fantasy rugby title. We're also going to talk about the eventual MLR 2022 champion. Can't wait. That's going to be decided this weekend. For Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I am Ryan Yee. We'll be here next week. Make sure you stay tuned and keep on watching the journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.